Hello, Kuma229 here, another Zelda topic for Christmas month of 2016. This topic might be considered a little controversial in the Zelda fandom, but I still think it's something important to talk about, and actually something that I actually have a lot of strong feelings about. This topic was submitted by Majora in 89, and her topic is, Ocarina of Time is a good game, there's no doubt about that. But other good games spawned from that game, games that get serious undue hatred. These games being Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, and Twilight Princess. In your opinion, what makes these games just as good, if not better than Ocarina of Time, and why do they deserve more praise than they get? Okay, so the Zelda fandom loves Ocarina of Time, and rightfully so. It's a good game. It really is, and considering it's one of the most revolutionary games in gaming history, it deserves the respect it gets. But a lot of people still to this day consider it the greatest game of all time and consider it one of the best made games ever. And I take issue with that. It's not because Ocarina of Time is a good game. It's not a good game. Far from it. The first time I played the game was in 2010 on the Wii Virtual Console. And that game held up. After having played Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, I thought that game was great. And that is impressive for a game that came out in the late 90s. The fact that it holds up, that the game design holds up that well, is something short of a miracle. But it is not the best Zelda game. Honestly, I like several other Zelda games better than it. And the three listed are three of the most important ones to talk about. First off, I want to talk about its direct sequel, Majora's Mask. When I first played Ocarina of Time, I was like, oh wow, this is pretty good. Now, there were some issues. Granted, some of the graphics are severely dated, but graphics aren't all that important to the enjoyment of a game unless they're really bad. The gameplay was, while I've played better, the fact that it came out in the 90s, and the fact that I still enjoyed playing it, pretty big deal. But Wind Waker and Twilight Princess both outclassed that. But one thing that I noticed when I started playing Majora's Mask immediately afterwards was the presentation of that game is so much better. The animations are better. And honestly, even though it reuses a lot of assets from Ocarina of Time being a parallel universe, I actually thought it was a much better written game. Majora's Mask is an oddball just gaming in general, considering the fact that it has an extremely simple main story. There aren't really a lot of twists in it, and considering the fact that the game runs on a 3-day time loop, you repeat the same day's events over and over. But one thing that I love about this is its focus on side quests. And the bulk of that game actually comes from its side quests. There are only 4 dungeons. There are only 4 main dungeons, and sure, there's other stuff you can explore and other areas you can go to that might be considered sort of dungeons. But the 4 main, the dungeons for the giants, is the main, focus of, you complete those, you win the game, basically, and, beat Majora. But the world of Termina is so fleshed out, it's almost unreal. With everything being done on a 3-day loop, they were actually able to give everyone schedules for those 3 days. People are doing stuff in different times. This is why you have the little bomber's notebook to keep track of this and see, okay, they're doing this, and this day, and you have dozens of characters doing all sorts of different things. Some things are only open for certain times. Some people have their own little plot lines going on. The whole Anju and Cafe, I think it's Anju and Cafe, plot line where he was turned into a child, and they were supposed to get married, and they actually have a quest that spans all 3 days. You have to do all sorts of different stuff in order to get their final mask. it's downright crazy. There's so many characters that you have that have their own stories, especially the transformation masks, the ones that you get a Goron transformation, a Deku transformation, a Zora transformation. Getting those transformation masks, each one of those masks has a story behind it. And wow. And that hit me harder than anything in Ocarina of Time. And no, this isn't an attack on Ocarina of Time. It's just saying what Majora's Mask did better. And sadly, I think Majora's Mask got a lot of undue flack. I know that in a lot of recent years, people have been coming around and going, yeah, Majora's Mask was pretty good. But for a long time, especially when I started getting in, when I played it, it was 2010 when I started playing that game. 2010, 2011. So, around that time, I wanted to see, what people thought, and there were a lot of people who didn't like Majora's Mask, and I saw a lot of that. Now, I'm glad to have found a lot of people who, do like the game, and to be honest, for a while it was my favorite Zelda game. Well, second favorite after Wind Waker. Yeah, but Majora's Mask is such an improvement. And considering the fact that they didn't have to remake all the assets, especially characters. They did do some characters, but a lot of it was reused. So that allowed them to focus on, the writing, the actual game world, the game design, the side quests, and something else that stuck out to me was the animation. Apart from the presentation and the whole creepy vibe to it, which to this day can still send shivers on my spine. Especially when you see those HD, like people who make those animations for Majora's Mask, those like completely HD ones. Oh gosh, those get creepy. One thing I noticed, one of the very first things I noticed when I was playing Majora's Mask was one of the jumping animations. So instead of just being Link does, I know when the first time he jumped, Link did this like twist and flip, and I was like, oh. And that was the first time that really stuck out to me that they had made an improvement in terms of the game, Majora's Mask in. Oh, I still love Majora's Mask. Honestly, it is one of my favorite Zeldas. The breadth of content in just the side quests and the stories in it. Honestly, I don't know if Zelda has ever really broken, that record of having so many likable, and fleshed out side characters, just NPCs. Everyone has their own stories, and you can actually see, and I spent so much time doing this. Going to each of the people throughout the 3 days and talking to them, especially when you see the moon coming down, and because there's such a marked difference between day 1 and day 3. A lot of people day 1 be like, so it's the moon. Day 3, they'll go like, oh crap, the moon is going to kill us all. And there are so many things you can do with that. One of my favorite stories being the mailman, who's so dedicated to his job that he's going to be delivering mail up until the end of the world. But you can actually help him by releasing him from his job, because you can follow a quest line to basically get him pardon from duty, and he'll be like, oh thank you, and then leaves. And it's like these weird little satisfying moments that really flesh everyone out. And to be honest, in terms of those kinds of side quests, I think Majora's Mask has still done that the best, and it really doesn't get as much respect as it should. Now, as for Wind Waker was my first Zelda game that I played and bought, and I mentioned that before. So, and I already talked about, why I loved Ganon from that game, but there's so much about that game that's so good. It's an absolute break in the Zelda, formula. And while it does still follow a lot of that, the whole concept of the Great Sea is really interesting. Now, there are some stuff that it could have done better, but you can really look at that in any Zelda game. One thing that Wind Waker got right was its story and its art style. Now, I won't go into great detail of that, because I did talk a bit about the writing last time. But the world of the Great Sea and all the different and the several different villages, you had the Koroks and the Great Tree, the Great Deku Tree. You had Windfall Island. You had Dragon Roost Island. And you had the ferry, the Great Ferry. And to be honest, those were pretty much the only places that had any significant people. Oh yeah, I mean, you also had Outset Island too, but really, there weren't a whole lot considering how big the Great Sea was. But a lot of people gave that game a lot of crap for its sailing. And it's funny, because even as a kid, the sailing never bothered me. Because honestly, when you're sailing, you're not going to be sailing, 5 feet to the next island. Now, could it take a long time? Yes. And am I glad that they made improvements to that in Wind Waker HD? Yes. But it never really bothered me, and I don't really understand why people... I never really understood why people had such a big issue with it. 7.8, too much water. But the game had so many good things. Even aside from its story and having what I argue is the best Ganondorf the series has seen thus far. One thing that I love is the fact that this is when they were really starting to play with, the special moves, which is something that they did more in Twilight Princess. The pairing moves were honestly really great, and I had a lot of fun with that. Even though it was a fairly simple system of basically press A when you're about to be attacked and perform a big move. And it was pretty important for some enemies, such as Dark Nuts, which you needed to perform pairing attacks in order to, get their armor off and actually fight them. It was such a fun game, and it had so many good things to it. And I actually have to say, along with Majora's Mask, it had a breadth of side content. Just a lot of side quests. And like I said before, I spent 254 hours in that game, and a lot of that was finishing side quests. Going through, and I actually had to look up some side quests just to know about them. Like, I know some of the stuff like the bigger quiver and bigger magic stuff that you have to find fairies and defend them, and then these fairies will grant you more stuff. But one of the side quests that I remember the most, one of my favorites, was the flower side quest, which seems like an extremely simple side quest at first. And you have to basically expand this guy on Windfall Island's shop. And Windfall Island has its own breadth of content. And honestly, I was a little disappointed when I finished everything. Even if I spent dozens of hours doing it, it was also it was like I finished literally everything in there. And I'm like, kind of wish there was more. But the guy who runs the shop and you can actually, he has these flowers that you can buy, and then you can bring these flowers all over the Great Sea, and you can trade them with people to get new flowers and basically expand this guy's shop. Honestly, that was a weirdly entertaining side quest, because I kind of thought at first it might be dull, but I actually really enjoyed it. And the fact that Nintendo can actually do that, take something that you're looking at, you're like, that's probably going to be boring as heck, and go, wow, I really got into this. My inner entrepreneur just flared up. And overall, Wind Waker is just such a fun game. Just because it's not Ocarina of Time, and the fact that it actually breaks, from Zelda tradition, doesn't mean it's bad. In fact, I see a lot of people complained about that. A lot of people said, well, it's not like that. And okay, it's not like Ocarina of Time. Alright. And the fact that it's not like the, the Space World 2001 demo? Or the show? Which was just a kind of a what-if, taking a more Ocarina of Time look and giving it a flashy graphics. And a lot of people were complaining that it didn't look like that. But thankfully, a lot of people have since come around and realized that just because it's got some cartoony graphics doesn't mean it's a bad game. But yeah, a lot of people complain that Wind Waker broke tradition, which, ironically, considering the fact that so many times people complain about Zelda doing the same thing over and over, when it does something different, they hate it. then when it does the same thing again, they hate it again, and which leads me to talking about Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess is what I like to call Ocarina of Time 2.0. After all the years of people complaining that, oh, Wind Waker wasn't like Zelda, or it wasn't like Ocarina of Time, or we want a game like Ocarina of Time, Nintendo made a game like Ocarina of Time. And people hated it. The Zelda fandom can be downright unpleasable. I actually replayed Zelda, or Twilight Princess, a few years ago. And after having not played it since it initially came out in 2006, I thought, man, this game is so much better than I remember. I mean, it has such a dark story and such a, kind of hard-hitting story, too. And Zelda always has a tendency of doing that. And in a lot of ways, it's basically, not a repeat, but it's basically done in a very similar style to Ocarina of Time. It has a lot of similar weapons, it has a lot of similar themes for its dungeons, but it managed to do something in a way that made it unique instead of just being a rehash of Ocarina of Time, and people still complained. They complained that it was too similar to Ocarina of Time, and that's what they've been begging for years. Oh gosh, people, make up your minds. Twilight Princess is basically what I like to say, it's better than Ocarina of Time. It is Ocarina of Time 2.0. It takes everything that worked in Ocarina of Time and makes it better. You like the hook shot? Well, now we got a claw shot. Now we got 2 claw shots. Excuse me. Pardon me. You get dual claw shots. You get all this cool stuff. You get the different tunics back. You can put on the tunic, the Zord tunic, or the magic armor and stuff. Which, gosh dang, that was so expensive. And while it's Ganondorf is not my favorite Ganondorf, I still really like Twilight Princess's Ganondorf. And he was such a scary villain. And honestly, one of the things I also really love about Twilight Princess is that this is the first game that we actually truly got that was establishing the other timelines. Now, a lot of people always want to ignore this, is that Miyamoto had said back in, I think it was in 1998, that at the end of Ocarina of Time there were 2 timelines that were created just from Zelda's choice. Ultimately, we find out that there were 3 overall, considering the downfall timeline involves Link losing. But there were 2. The very ending of the game created 2 timelines. The child timeline, where Link was sent back in time by Zelda, and he basically lived his life out, and this went to Majora's Mask. Which, yeah, considering, but the Twilight Princess, considering the fact that it's very much considered a counterpart to Wind Waker in the timelines, I think is one that, felt like it was more justifying the timelines. But then there was the adult timeline, which basically everything went to hell in a hell basket, or hell in a handbasket, and then Link was sent back, and then they had no Link. So when Ganondorf came back, they didn't have a Link to defend them, and that's what led to Wind Waker. So now we have the 2 timelines leading to different games, and honestly, so many people didn't really appreciate that. And also at this time, there were a lot of people who still thought that there was a single timeline. Those are pretty funny. Twilight Princess did everything, and it's funny, even something that I had speculated for years that when that was ultimately confirmed is that the hero Shade was actually Ocarina of Time Link. Whoa. That was ultimately confirmed in Hyrule Historia, which I'm so excited about that. Now, one of the biggest things about Twilight Princess that a lot of people complained about was that it was similar to Ocarina of Time, and it was obviously done, it was done on purpose. The whole layout was similar, you visited a lot of similar areas, but everything was completely reinvented for a different game. You had Castle Town, you had Death Mountain, you had Zora's Domain, You had the forest area that you start out in. A lot of stuff was very similar, but everything was unique to its story. And honestly, a lot of people really just need to appreciate the different, Zelda games. You can have your favorite, and honestly, I don't mind if someone has their favorite being Ocarina of Time. I really don't. But there's this whole idea that all the other Zelda games suck because Ocarina of Time is the best. It's a lot of people locked in nostalgia. And honestly, this is one of the reasons why I'm glad I never played Ocarina of Time until about 6 years ago. Because I can look at that game and pick out why it's a good game without having a ton of nostalgia blocking me from, making a rational decision. Though, not that it would, considering even my nostalgia for older games I can look past, like the Crash Bandicoot games, which I freaking love. But it's one of the problems that the fandom has is that a lot of them lock onto Ocarina of Time. And that's it. So, if something isn't exactly like Ocarina of Time, it's bad. Wind Waker got a lot of flack for this, which is why we got Twilight Princess, which, in a lot of ways, is everything that Ocarina of Time wanted to be, and then some. And people hated it because it was too similar. And they hated that because they had Twilight Princess. It wasn't going up against Ocarina of Time, because when you compare apples to apples, Twilight Princess is the better game. What they were comparing it to was their nostalgia. And your nostalgia can never be matched. And this is something a lot of people, I really want to tell this to a lot of people. Your nostalgia can never be matched. Those nostalgic memories from your childhood can never be matched by anything ever. Because those are personal feelings that only you have. And they are extremely strong feelings, from years ago. Like my nostalgia for playing the Crash Bandicoot games or the Spyro games on the PlayStation 1 way back when, no game could ever compete with those. My nostalgic memories of playing Super Mario Brothers on the NES, nothing can match those feelings. Because they're feelings. And a lot of people, and I do want to respectfully say this, is that you can have those feelings. You can love those games from your childhood. But you do need to but when you're arguing about, from an objective perspective, you need to look at saying, okay, while I do love this, it's not the greatest thing ever of all time. And I do think a lot of people had that. And a lot of people do have this about a lot of games, especially from the 90s. I mean, Final Fantasy VII gets lauded as the greatest RPG ever of all time, when there are better ones out there, but a lot of people have nostalgic memories, and that's not Zelda, and that's, sort of irrelevant to this topic, but ultimately, a lot of people have those nostalgic feelings about Ocarina of Time, and it's perfectly understandable. A revolutionary game, the first 3D Zelda game, a game that had such excellent game design, it still holds up to this day with only, a handful of issues. Yeah, in a lot of ways it deserves the respect it gets. But in others, a lot of people just kind of need to realize that while it's a good game, it's not the best. And to be honest, I like almost every game that's come out after Ocarina of Time more than Ocarina of Time. I like Majora's Mask better. I like Wind Waker better. I like Twilight Princess better. I even like Skyward Sword better. And it's not because Ocarina of Time is a bad game. Quite the contrary. It's simply because the Zelda series is so good. Nintendo puts their absolute AAA effort into these games. And it kind of annoys me when people don't respect that just because they're looking at, no, Ocarina of Time is the best game ever. Ocarina of Time is... I think it's more fitting to say it's one of the most revolutionary games and one of the most important games to gaming history, which is I think a prestigious title to give that game. It doesn't need to be called the greatest game ever for it to be recognized as being a good game. I think we just need to take a more measured approach to how we talk about it instead of just talking in absolutes, because I know that over the years I've seen Ocarina of Time top so many top 10 games of all time list, which one of the things that bothers me about this, and I think a lot of people don't even particularly think about this as much, is that if you're saying that Ocarina of Time is the best game ever of all time, that means that games haven't truly progressed since 1998. That's really what it's saying. And while you can have a lot, I do understand liking that game a lot, but saying that it's better, not just of all the other Zeldas, but of all games ever, I think we can end up with, being stuck in the past. Being stuck 20 years in the past of not acknowledging all the improvements that have been made. And especially Twilight Princess, which takes everything from Ocarina of Time and improves it. You have a bigger world, have a bigger story. You have a continuation from one of the timelines of Ocarina of Time, specifically the ones that Majora's Mask went along. You have all this stuff going on, the whole Twilight realm, all that great stuff. And a lot of times people didn't appreciate it because they were fighting, it was going up against nostalgia. And honestly, I just want something that the Zelda fandom should know, is that while Ocarina of Time is a great game and very important to gaming history, we do have to look at the fact that things have improved, and the Zelda series has moved forward past that. And while a lot of these games do get respect, there's always going to be that subset of fans who only look at Ocarina of Time, which kind of upsets me, because there's so many good games in this series that if you're only limiting yourself to Ocarina of Time, you're not really appreciating all the good things that the series has done since then. And I just think people really need to do that, because there's so many good games, and you can still think that Ocarina of Time is your favorite game of all time. That's your own personal feelings, and no one can take that away from you. But you have to acknowledge that there are actually better games not just in gaming, not just in its own franchise, but possibly gaming in general. Well, I think that about wraps up this topic. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. If you want to submit a topic, you can just, comment below on YouTube, or if you're on Tumblr, send me an ask and do topic : and then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Just make sure that you follow the rules that I'm posting down below, and make sure that it's about something fictional and, not something a super real world topic. And if you're not sure if I know anything about it, to talk about it, just ask me. I will tell you. I'll tell you if I know anything about it. So that's about it, and continue looking forward to more Zelda-themed topics for Christmas month 2016. Thank you for watching.